Hello, my name is Aaron Artrip, and today we're going to be talking about generative drums. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is on our first MIDI track, we're going to add a 606 core kit from Ableton's browser. We're going to go to Drums, and we're going to double-click on the 606 core kit. On our first MIDI track, let's double-click in our first MIDI clip to give us a 1-bar section. Let's add a standard drum beat. All right, the next thing we're going to do is duplicate our first MIDI track, and we're going to turn the second MIDI track into our generative drum patterns. We do this by using Command-D or Control-D on Windows. In this new duplicated MIDI clip, let's remove all of the MIDI notes except the first one. And let's extend the first one all the way for the entire length of the loop. The next thing we're going to do on our second MIDI track is add a few devices from Ableton's MIDI effects browser. The first one being an arpeggiator, and the second one being a random. Let's stop the first MIDI clip and play just our new MIDI clip. You can hear that the kick drum is just repeating because the arpeggiator is sending an 1/8 note rate to the kick drum, which is the only MIDI note we have selected. Let's turn our chance parameter and our random device up to around 54%. A little more than halfway is good. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, so you can hear that it's selecting random drum notes across the 16 pads we have, but it's really only selecting 12 based on our random choices. Let's turn our choices up to around 20 or above. So what you're hearing is the MIDI notes being triggered into the drum rack, but there's some space and air available. What that's coming from is that it's triggering a handful of empty sample slots. This way, it gives a little bit of air or breathing room to the rhythm. Before we go any further, we're going to use an EQ8 to help take off some of the low end so that it doesn't compete with our first drum track. Inside the browser window under Audio Effects, let's double-click on an EQ8. Let's select the first band and change this to a high-pass filter. We'll set this at around 150. This can be changed later on. Okay, so that way a lot of the low end is cut out. So let's hear what it sounds like with the first drum track we wrote. All right, so now we're getting somewhere. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to use some automation changes to affect the rate amount on our arpeggiator. The way we do that is we can double-click on our new MIDI clip, and this will bring us to the MIDI browser. In the bottom left-hand corner, on the right side of these 3 circles, is our Show Hide envelope box. One thing we want to make sure to do when selecting parameters is let's click on our rate parameter, and you'll notice there are 4 brackets that pop up around it. This is really helpful when writing parameter changes. Let's double-click again on our MIDI clip, and you will see under our envelope window that the arpeggiator synced rate is already selected. Ableton Live's arpeggiator default rate is set to an 1/8 note. We're going to write in some automation changes to switch between 1/8 note rate and 16th note rate to give us some change and variation in our rhythms. Let's double-click and add some anchor points. We'll draw these down to a 16th note, and you can choose really wherever you'd like. All right, let's see how that sounds. All right, that sounds pretty good. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to duplicate this new MIDI clip. And let's, in our note window, let's duplicate our loop length. Let's take our second MIDI note and change it to a different note. What this does is effectively changes the reference point for the arpeggiator to start from. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, so you can hear in the first half of this clip, we have the kick drum being the reference point, and it's moving up the different notes that are available. And in the second half of the clip, it's using the hi-hat close as a reference point and moving upwards and selecting notes. Let's duplicate this again and add some more MIDI notes. You can double-click anywhere to add a note. Let's see what this sounds like. Okay, let's duplicate this again and keep going. I'm going to continue to stack more MIDI notes so that the arpeggiator has more notes to choose from. Okay, so another thing that we can do to add even more sort of random or chance variables to our new drum track is that we can introduce what are called launch actions. In our browser to the left here, we can see there is a launch view. What this will allow us to do is to set a repeat time for each clip. This first window representing bars, we can set the length or the time that it spends playing through a loop before it goes to the next follow action. The follow action has many options you can choose from. For this example, we're going to choose any for all of our clips so that they are randomly chosen after each one is finished playing. So for our first randomly generated clip, let's set our bar length to 4 and our follow action to any. For the second one, let's do 2 bars and set this one to any. For the third one, let's set this to 6 and choose any. And then finally, for our last one, we'll do 3 and again, choose any. In order for these to take action, you'll need to stop all of your clips. So you could click any of these squares in the MIDI tracks to stop the clip. So let's hear what that sounds like. Over on the right-hand side, you can use our scene launch to select all of the particular clips in this scene to fire at once. Now let's take notice at the blinking playheads as each clip begins to wait for the previous clip to play through before it goes to the next section. Let's say you're in a situation where you hear a series of randomly generated MIDI notes that happens to play a very interesting rhythm, and you want to capture this idea and use it in a repetitive manner moving forward. What you can do is you can capture the MIDI, post the Ableton devices, and record it on a new MIDI track. We can do this by setting in a new MIDI track the MIDI from to our corresponding track. In this case, it's track 2, the 606 core kit. Let's hit play just to make sure we're getting MIDI information here by setting our monitor to N. All right, so we're getting MIDI information here. Let's arm our track by selecting the arm button, and you'll notice that these circles now become available in your MIDI clips. When you select one of these circles, it will arm this clip to record any information sent to it. All right, so now we have a 4-bar section of these generated MIDI notes, but on this MIDI track, there's no instruments or drum rack available, and so what we'll need to do is actually drag this MIDI clip to our second MIDI track, which is our randomly generated drums. In order for these notes to play exactly how they're written, we'll need to write an automation change for this MIDI clip to turn off the arpeggiator and the random devices. We can do that by going into our envelope window and selecting arpeggiator, and under the second drop-down menu, select device on. We can drag this down to turn it off. And let's do the same for the random device. Going back to our device window, you can see now that the arpeggiator and the random devices both have red dots next to them. This means there's an automation change to turn those off. Let's play the MIDI clip beforehand and watch it select the next one. And here it goes off in just a minute when this is done playing through its 8 bars. You can see now they're off. And it's going to play these notes exactly how they're written. And that's one way of making generative drums in Ableton Live. Again, my name is Artrip. Thanks for being with me.